Traditionally, play has been conceived as a sphere separate from everyday life that someone enters voluntarily, taking place in specific arenas, at specific times, and with a specific social etiquette. Yet, in pervasive forms of play, such as location-based games, this magic circle becomes expanded spatially, temporally, and socially, extended into real physical places with rhythms and communities of their own. This means that unlike conventional video games, as a location-based game developer, you can't build and shape the game's environment to fit the kind of experiences you want players to have. Instead, you have to draw on the existing qualities and affordances of the places in which the game is set to craft the gameplay. In my research, I've been asking how can developers negotiate the limitations, specificities, and contingencies that come with designing a game set in physical locations? And how do players themselves negotiate these affordances? How does the playing of games set in physical locations enable players to engage with place in particular ways? The mobility of players in location-based games is a unique challenge to developers. Players can choose to go anywhere, which can present problems when attempting to guide players to specific locations, or if they have to find these for themselves. The experience can quickly become unsatisfying or even anxiety-inducing if players have to travel far, get lost, or stuck in a particular location. When testing my location-based treasure hunt game, Canterbury in 3 Words, I attempted to manage these contingencies by asking players to only write stories about locations within Canterbury's city walls, as I felt the whole city was too wide an area for the number of testers I had. Indeed, in interviews, players frequently mentioned how grateful they were to know which areas counted, otherwise the locations could be anywhere and would have discouraged them from spending time exploring the city. With fewer limitations around when players can play, as well as where, it's also revealing to consider how practices of play become incorporated into the rhythms of their everyday lives. I've found that players would carve out opportunities to play within their daily routines, such as during commutes when they were travelling through the city centre, or when browsing social media in the evenings. In some cases, this even led them to modify their journeys, or become more critically aware of their surroundings when taking their existing routes. However, the general lack of time many players have had to play has been the biggest barrier to participation, and it has been a continual difficulty as a designer to devise meaningful gameplay with people's busy lives in mind. This is without mentioning the impact that events like the coronavirus pandemic can have. I've recently had to adapt the gameplay of my latest game, Canterbury in 3 Words, to the spatio-temporal limitations enforced by the UK lockdown and social distancing. In negotiating this considerable design challenge, the game now has a much greater emphasis on using online tools for engaging with locations, such as Google Maps and Street View, rather than in-person navigation and sociability. Location-based games expand the magic circle of play spatially, temporally, and socially, but in doing so, the spatial, temporal, and social bounds of everyday life become the defining limits of the game. By attuning and interacting with these boundaries playfully, players of location-based games can reveal and enact the performativity of place. This can potentially be a transformative process, as players become newly aware of the processes through which places become meaningful to us. But this interaction between the game and everyday life also presents numerous tensions and contingencies that can be difficult to manage and make sense of, both as a designer and a player.